Hi folks, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Well, it's all over. The Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial is now in the history books and everybody has a hot take on it, and I'm no exception. And I'll get to that in just a moment. I've seen a lot of people on both sides of this issue take different pot shots at the jury on this, and everybody needs to leave the jury alone. They had a tough job to do. They sat through 6 weeks of trial testimony, and they reached a verdict in less than 3 days. So, in my opinion, the jury did exactly what they were supposed to do. They took the time, they analyzed the case, and they reached a result. And the result they reached is completely consistent with the facts and the evidence presented at trial. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are being said with respect to domestic abuse victims. First of all, anyone who is in a loving relationship with someone else and raises their fist to that person is beyond contempt as far as I'm concerned. If you love somebody, you don't hit somebody. For the most part, you don't even yell at them. If you can't sit down and rationally discuss what the problem is, then you've got a serious issue and you probably need some counseling. You need some anger management to deal with that. Nobody should ever be in a relationship where they have to worry about the other person, whether that person is male or female, beating on them. That's just wrong. Now, in this particular case, there was lots of evidence, lots of recorded evidence of Amber Heard beating on Johnny Depp.
Is there something amusing about kicking a door into your husband's head? You even roll your eyes at one point. Is there something amusing to you about punching your husband in the jaw?
That is not what I was smiling about, and no, I do not think it's amusing.
Okay, I'm sorry. I never even addressed it. He was just very dramatic.
None that I saw of the other way around. In other words, there were no recordings where Johnny Depp said, well, I just smacked you, I didn't hit you. There were plenty of those with Amber Heard. So, in terms of the evidence, I think there's good evidence that Johnny Depp was not an abuser and that he was a victim. And in fact, the most telling the most telling audio that I heard in that entire trial was where she was saying, oh, come on, Johnny, tell the world you're a victim of domestic abuse. See who believes you. Well, he told the world, and now we know who believes him. It was a jury of 7 people who came back and said, yep, you beat on him. So I think there's a lot to be said for the value of going through a jury trial. Now, let's talk a little bit about defamation, because one of the things that has been raised here is the First Amendment, and that somehow you have a First Amendment right to say untruthful things. You have an absolute right under the First Amendment to believe anything you want. You can believe the earth is flat. You can say the earth is flat. Even though that is provably false, you can say it, and it's protected by the First Amendment because that statement does not harm anybody except perhaps the person making it, because it makes them look like an imbecile. What you don't have a right to do is destroy somebody else's reputation with falsehoods. And there is a difference between a falsehood and an opinion. And that is, you can say, in my opinion, Mr. Depp is not a very nice person because he uses drugs. Okay, that's your opinion. And there is evidence that he has used drugs. So it's not an untruthful statement with respect to the basis for it. But what you can't say is that he is a domestic abuser if you did not see him do it, and there is no physical evidence that he did do it, and no medical treatment, no medical evidence that he did it. So I think it's very, very important, at least as far as I'm concerned, that the jury, when it reached this verdict, reached it on the basis of the evidence. Now, I saw an interview today between Savannah Guthrie and the attorney for Ms. Heard, who says that she's going to file an appeal. Well, that's what I do. I do appeals, and I can tell you the things that attorney talked about, particularly the evidentiary issues, those are always the weakest forms of an appeal. And the reason for that is because the admission of evidence at a trial is discretionary with the trial judge. For example, whether or not a particular document was relevant to the outcome of the trial, that is committed to the discretion of the trial court. Even if an appellate court might make a different decision based on the document, even if they had been sitting in her chair, they would have made a different decision. They are not going to overturn her decision unless it was a manifest abuse of discretion. And what does that mean? That means that under ordinary circumstances, no rational judge would have made that decision. Basically, it has to kind of shock the conscience. It has to be so black and white that it was a wrong decision that a judge has to step in and say, no, I'm sorry, Judge, you made an error. Otherwise, there's not going to be a reversal. And even if they determine that the judge made an error in not admitting the evidence, that doesn't mean you get a reversal unless it is critical to the case. In other words, unless you can show prejudice, meaning that you can show that the result would have been different but for that evidence, there is absolutely no way in most cases that an appellate court is going to reverse the verdict in that case. So it's very interesting to me that they're already talking about an appeal. Appeals cost money, and appeals usually cost a lot of money. And because of that, I think it is a very bad idea for Ms. Heard, who's already down about $8 million in this deal. I think it's a really bad idea for her to fund an appeal on this and try and dig herself out. Generally speaking, when you find yourself in a hole, you got to put down the shovel and pick up the ladder and crawl out of the hole. She's trying to dig the hole deeper, and it's not going to be something that she's going to be able to recover from. Now, I've also seen the specter raised among other people that, well, she'll just take bankruptcy and get out of it. Well, if Ms. Heard was a corporation, that would probably work. But Ms. Heard is an individual, and when an individual takes action that harms another person, and it's an intentional action, and defamation is an intentional tort, then usually that is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. There are sometimes exceptions to that rule, but usually it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. So that's going to be an issue for Ms. Heard also. Now, I think when I initially started looking at this trial, I thought I was going to make a video on this every other day or so, but I didn't, primarily because the evidence was coming in very one-sided at the beginning. And then I thought, well, when Ms. Heard gets up, there'll be some evidence, and I'll want to consider that before I make any determinations. And then the evidence came in on Ms. Heard's side, and it was all one-sided too, but it was one-sided the way the other evidence had been. It was in support of Mr. Depp. So I regret sort of that I didn't make a lot of videos on this, because it would have been a great case to talk about a number of different things. But on the positive side, nobody can say that I attempted to sway the jury's verdict in this case. And there have been a lot of charges that that's what happened, that the people on YouTube and Twitter have said things that have caused the jury to make this decision. First of all, I believe that when jurors are told, don't look at social media, they don't look at social media. I believe these jurors took an oath. Those people are bound by that oath, and they would have done what they are required to do by that oath. And for that very reason, I think that a lot of this criticism that is now being ginned up after the fact is very badly misplaced. And I will say this also. The criticisms that have been leveled at the judge in this case are flat out ridiculous. She was a very even-handed judge, very level-headed. She had control of that courtroom. She did a masterful job in this case of keeping the case on track, on time, and getting to the jury as it should have, with the right evidence and with the right time frame. And I think she presided over the trial in a very great way. I would think that she would be an excellent candidate to become an appellate judge, because she seemed to me to be exceptionally reasonable. So I think anybody who heard the criticism of the judge and took it to heart should probably not. The judge did a good job in this case. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. The only real complaint that I have in this case is the $2 million judgment for Ms. Heard. I look at that as sort of a compromise, that maybe somebody wanted to try and balance the scales so that it wouldn't appear all so one-sided. I think there is, if Mr. Depp were to cross appeal, there'd be a good chance he could knock that verdict down, because I don't believe there was ever any evidence that was offered that established that Waldman spoke for him on that issue. And so as a result, I think there's probably a pretty good basis for an appeal, at least as to Mr. Waldman's statements. And for that in particular, because they played the questions that were asked of Mr. Waldman to the jury when he invoked privilege. Generally speaking, in a case, you do not allow the answers where there were invocations of privilege to be seen by the jury, because what it makes it look like is somebody's hiding something, and you don't want that. The judge here let that in. I'm sure she had a very good reason to let it in, but I think it may wind up being trial court error, and it may wind up being an appeal. But that doesn't mean I think she did a bad job, because you view the entirety of what she did, not one or two isolated little instances. If you have a trial that lasts for 7 weeks and you don't make at least 1 or 2 mistakes in it, then you're not human. So that's my take on the Depp versus Heard case. I hope you have found this interesting, informative. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, click on those buttons, and I'd appreciate it. And if you have any comments, leave them in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please go over here and subscribe to our channel. And that way you'd be notified anytime we release a video here. So thank you again for watching, and have a great day.